Hey guys, tonight we travel far, far back. Past your to-do lists, past your inbox, even past that time you swore you'd organize your desk, to a land where the very idea of paperwork was being born. You're standing on a stretch of Egyptian sand that glows gold in the twilight, and somewhere nearby, a scribe is trying to balance a wooden board on his knees while a camel sneezes behind him. The air smells like warm reeds, river mud, and faint ambition. You probably won't survive the heat, but let's pretend you do. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, post your location and local time in the comments. I love seeing where everyone's drifting off from. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You walk barefoot along the Nile's edge. The river sighs with the slow rhythm of eternity, and across it, the pyramids shimmer like geometry lessons left unsolved. Around you, the world of early Egypt hums with life. Farmers hauling baskets, oxen dragging plows, priests chanting something mysterious about the floodwaters. Everything feels both ancient and oddly familiar. You squint, and what you see looks suspiciously like the very first version of an office. In this world, before laptops and ergonomic chairs, people are already obsessed with keeping track of things: grain, cattle, workers, taxes. You see a man in a linen kilt scratching symbols onto a lump of clay. He's sweating, focused, muttering something that probably translates to, "Why does the pharaoh need another inventory today?" Because yes, even here, bureaucracy is alive and well. The Egyptians are running an empire that stretches along hundreds of miles of riverbank. The Nile floods each year, turning the valley into a green ribbon through the desert. It's both a blessing and a headache. Someone has to record how much wheat grew, who harvested it, and who owes what to whom. Without records, chaos reigns, and the gods, so everyone believes, hate chaos. Historians still argue whether Egyptians' obsession with record-keeping came from religious piety or from pure administrative panic. Maybe both. What we know is that writing here wasn't invented for poetry or philosophy. It was invented for paperwork. Romantic, isn't it? You follow one of those early scribes into a small, dark hut beside a temple. His table is a flat stone. His stylus, just a sharpened reed. His writing surface, a slab of damp clay. It's heavy, sticky, and frankly not ideal when you're trying to jot down the latest shipment of fish for the priests. The marks he makes will dry into permanence, which is great for posterity, but terrible for corrections. Still, it's progress. You watch him carefully press a series of small shapes into the clay. Tiny pictures of reeds, jars, and birds. Each sign stands for a word or sound. Hieroglyphs. They're beautiful, but impractical. You can almost hear his sigh. He glances out the door, toward the Nile again. Somewhere out there grows the plant that will change everything. Papyrus. You see it waving in the water like green feathers, whispering secrets to the wind. The scribe doesn't know it yet, but soon those reeds will become lighter, smoother, and infinitely more flexible than his slabs of clay. They'll turn writing into something you can roll up, file, and lose under a pile of other things you swore you'd get to later. But for now, he keeps scratching, line after line. His boss, a priest with a gold collar and zero chill, hovers nearby, demanding faster results. The scribe tries not to roll his eyes. Bureaucratic pressure transcends millennia. One quirky tidbit floats through your drowsy thoughts. Ancient Egyptian scribes sometimes used bits of pottery, called ostraka, for quick notes or rough drafts. You imagine an ancient sticky note, except it's a shard of someone's broken bowl. Buy more ink, tax collector coming Tuesday. Maybe even lunch with Nefertiti, don't forget sandals. Archaeologists have found piles of these fragments, proving humanity has always needed a place to scribble nonsense. The sun sets behind the dunes, the desert cools, and the clay tablets dry, locking the day's data into history. Somewhere, a temple accountant checks totals and sighs with satisfaction. The system works, but just barely. You sit beside the river, half hypnotized by the soft rustle of papyrus reeds. The night wind is gentle now, carrying the scent of mud and lotus blossoms. You can almost hear the reeds whispering to each other, ideas about thin sheets, smooth writing, and an easier life for sore-handed scribes. The stars above are bright and patient. They've seen empires rise, fall, and send endless memos about grain storage. You stretch out, feeling the sand cool under your palms. The story is just beginning. Somewhere in that shimmering water, the first page of human bureaucracy is waiting to be born. Maybe tomorrow, the scribe will pick a reed and wonder what else it could do besides clogging riverboats. Maybe he'll start slicing and soaking, experimenting out of sheer frustration. Maybe, without knowing it, he'll invent the ancestor of every office printer jam you've ever cursed. And as you drift, you can't help but smiling at the irony. The same civilization that built the pyramids also built, well, filing cabinets, or at least the ancient equivalent. The moon climbs higher, turning the Nile silver. The scribes have gone home. The clay tablets lie drying by the fire. The reeds sway gently, waiting for someone curious enough or desperate enough to turn them into something revolutionary. You lie back, hearing the soft pulse of the river, and realize that bureaucracy, like sleep, is inevitable. It creeps into every civilization, filling it with order, lists, and late-night regrets. Tomorrow, we'll see how those reeds transform from plants into the first sheets of paper, and how the ancient Egyptians unwittingly invented office life as you know it. But for now, you stay by the water, half dreaming, half listening, surrounded by the quiet hum of history beginning to organize itself.
Morning comes slow over the Nile, the sky fading from indigo to honey gold. You're still there, lying by the water's edge, when a fisherman's song stirs you awake. The reeds sway gently beside you, tall, green, and humming with possibility. You rub your eyes and realize these delicate stalks are about to change human history, one soggy experiment at a time. A craftsman trudges toward the riverbank, carrying a worn bronze knife and the unmistakable air of someone who's had too many requests from temple officials. You follow him as he kneels in the mud, inspecting the papyrus plants. They stand in tight clusters, their triangular stems slicing sunlight into ribbons. He bends one, snaps it cleanly, and grins. Strong, he probably murmurs. Flexible. He starts gathering handfuls, humming a tune that might have been ancient Egypt's version of a work playlist. You trail behind him to a shaded hut, a simple reed hut that smells faintly of river water and ambition. Inside, a few apprentices chatter while scraping stalks with shells. The rhythmic shick-shick-shick fills the air, and you realize you're witnessing the birth of the first paper factory, minus the safety regulations. The process looks almost magical. Each papyrus stem is sliced lengthwise, revealing a pale, spongy interior. Strips are laid out carefully, one overlapping the next, forming a horizontal layer. Then another layer is placed vertically on top, like a primitive grid. No glue, no machinery, just the plant's own natural sap binding everything together as it dries. The result? A smooth, flexible sheet that feels astonishingly modern in your hands. You imagine the craftsman's moment of discovery, holding the first finished piece up to the light, realizing it's thin yet strong, that ink doesn't bleed through, that it rolls without cracking. Somewhere in that second, the human brain does its little click, the sound of invention. A quirky fact floats to the surface of your sleepy thoughts. Papyrus wasn't just used for writing. Egyptians made boats, mats, sandals, even rope from it. Entire lives were built on the plant, literally. And yet, of all those uses, it's the flat sheet version that would echo through thousands of years, across continents, right up to the receipt currently crumpled in your pocket. Historians still argue whether the discovery of papyrus sheets was a happy accident. Maybe someone left strips pressed under a rock and found them fused, or a deliberate experiment by frustrated scribes. Either way, it's the kind of low-drama innovation that reshapes civilizations quietly, without fanfare, and definitely without a TED Talk. The craftsman sets a finished sheet aside, smooths it lovingly, and leaves it to dry in the sun. You can almost hear the paper crisping under the heat, a soft whisper like parchment dreaming of words. Soon, these sheets will be cut to size, polished with smooth stones, and sent to temples, archives, and workshops up and down the Nile. You drift closer to the table where apprentices prepare ink. They grind soot from oil lamps, mix it with gum arabic and a little water. One of them sneezes right into the ink bowl, and the others groan, a timeless moment of workplace frustration. You can't help but chuckle. Bureaucracy already has interns. The scribe from yesterday appears, drawn by rumor of the new invention. He picks up a sheet of papyrus, flexes it, tests it with his stylus. The ink flows cleanly, no smudging, no cracking. His eyes widen. You can almost hear the gears in his head turning. Lighter to carry, easier to store, faster to write on. The world just got an upgrade. He sits cross-legged, rolls the sheet carefully, and grins. Suddenly, documents can travel, letters can be stored, orders can be distributed. The empire's reach stretches not just across the Nile, but across time itself. The first office paperwork is ready to begin. Outside, the wind stirs through stalks of drying papyrus. They rustle softly like thousands of tiny bureaucratic wings preparing for flight. Somewhere down the river, a temple accountant feels a disturbance in the force and doesn't know why yet. The craftsman watches his invention spread, merchants buying it by the bundle, scribes praising its smooth surface, priests realizing they can make their sacred texts look extra holy. Prices rise, demand surges, and with that, an entire industry is born. You see workshops popping up along the Nile Delta, each competing to produce finer, smoother sheets. Ancient Egypt's first supply chain hums to life. You can practically hear the conversations. Your papyrus feels rough. Well, maybe your stylus is cheap. Oh, so now you're a quality inspector too. Somewhere between the banter and the bartering, the art of papyrus making becomes a guarded trade secret. The techniques are whispered from father to son, generation to generation. Centuries later, when Greek traders arrive asking how it's done, Egyptians smile politely and change the subject. A lazy ibis drifts overhead, its wings slicing through the sunlight. Below, the river gleams like liquid glass, carrying bundles of papyrus downstream toward bustling cities. Boats pass filled with scrolls destined for bureaucrats, priests, and probably a few people pretending to read them. You follow one such boat as it glides toward Memphis. Its cargo, a stack of newly pressed sheets, lies covered with woven mats. The captain hums an old hymn about abundance and taxes, which might be the same thing here. You watch the reeds journey from muddy water to golden sunlight to cargo hold. It's oddly soothing, like watching the world's first assembly line, only slower and with more crocodiles. As evening falls, the city lights flicker to life. oil lamps glowing through windows carved into mud brick walls. You walk past a temple where priests are chanting beside a chest of scrolls. The faint scent of ink fills the air. Nearby, a young scribe holds a fresh papyrus sheet against his chest like it's a sacred relic. Maybe it is. Maybe every piece of paperwork ever made, every receipt, every tax form, every "please confirm receipt of this email," owes its lineage to this exact moment. The wind picks up again, fluttering through the papyrus stacks, making them rustle like thousands of tiny bureaucratic wings preparing for flight. You realize you're standing in the origin of something vast, something that will one day make entire civilizations rise, collapse, and argue about late fees. You close your eyes, and the reeds hum a lullaby that sounds suspiciously like an ancient office printer warming up. Tomorrow, those sheets will travel upriver to the royal scribes, and paperwork will become power. But tonight, they're just drying leaves under the Egyptian stars, whispering softly about the future.
By the time the morning haze lifts off the Nile again, papyrus has spread through the cities like gossip in a royal court. You wander into Memphis, where the streets hum with markets, donkeys, and the constant shuffle of sandals on sun-baked stone. The air smells of honey, sweat, and something faintly singed, probably lunch. But over all that, there's a new scent, the earthy sweetness of ink drying on papyrus. You find yourself at the entrance of a government building, a long hall shaded by palm beam columns. It looks impressive in a, "yes, please wait in line forever" sort of way. Inside, rows of scribes bend over desks, their reed pens scratching softly in unison. It's the ancient Egyptian equivalent of open-plan office life, minus the ergonomic chairs and passive-aggressive emails. A supervisor strolls past in crisp linen, holding a bundle of scrolls like a badge of authority. He barks out orders, record the latest tax payments, confirm the number of oxen for the temple, update the king's census. The scribes barely look up. Their eyes are locked on their papyrus sheets, their hands moving with a rhythm that feels both sacred and slightly bored. This, you realize, is where bureaucracy truly awakens. Not the exciting kind, if there is such a thing, but the kind that quietly organizes empires. Here, numbers are not just numbers. They're proof of loyalty, of power, of divine order. Every grain of wheat, every goat, every jar of beer destined for the gods must be accounted for. You can almost hear the papyrus whispering, "If it's not written down, it doesn't exist." One mainstream historical fact floats gently into your thoughts. Ancient Egypt had a fully developed administrative system as early as 3000 BCE. Scribes were trained professionals, members of a privileged class who held the keys to knowledge itself. They documented taxes, construction, trade, even military logistics. Without them, the pharaoh's rule would have collapsed faster than a sandcastle in high tide. The man beside you dips his reed pen, actually just a sharpened piece of river grass, into a small ink pot. The ink smells faintly of soot and gum arabic. He steadies the papyrus sheet with one hand and begins to write, small, precise hieratic script flowing like a hypnotic dance, line after line of meticulous records. You lean closer and realize he's writing about fish, how many were caught, how many sent to the temple kitchens. It's oddly comforting. Even divine civilizations needed spreadsheets for lunch supplies. But not everything here is rigid order. As you drift along the rows of desks, you spot small doodles in the margins, tiny cats, awkward birds, maybe a sarcastic doodle of the supervisor. Some things never change. Even one young scribe hides a love note between two inventory lines. You can't help but smile. Bureaucracy may demand precision, but humans will always sneak a little chaos into the margins. A fringe tidbit whispers its way through your mind. Some ancient Egyptian scribes used red ink to highlight corrections or divine names. Red was both sacred and alarming,
like using a highlighter that also curses you if you spill it. The papyrus glows with alternating streaks of black and crimson, creating the world's first color-coded document. You imagine the office gossip. He wrote the pharaoh's name in red? Bold move. Outside, a breeze slips through the doorway, fluttering scrolls across the floor. Several scribes groan, chasing after them. You help gather the sheets, noticing how the papyrus curls softly at the edges. The texture feels like fine cloth, smooth yet slightly ridged, as if the plants still remember growing in water. You can almost hear the Nile inside it, whispering under the ink. The head scribe approaches, his expression equal parts pride and exhaustion. He carries a scroll sealed with clay, stamped with the pharaoh's insignia, a tiny falcon embossed with authority. This scroll will travel hundreds of miles by boat, carrying an official decree about taxes or irrigation rights. It's the ancient version of an email marked urgent, except this one won't vanish into spam. You follow the messenger outside as he tucks the scroll safely into a woven case. The sun glares down, and the river glitters like molten bronze. Boats wait at the dock, sleek papyrus vessels with sails that catch the wind like lazy wings. The messenger climbs aboard, the decree secure under his arm. As the sail fills, the city recedes behind him, and you realize that the paperwork machine now has legs, or rather, oars. Historians still argue whether this explosion of record-keeping came from genuine devotion to order or sheer fear of divine punishment. After all, in Egypt, everything was watched by the gods. Even grain counts might be seen as offerings of accuracy. Perhaps the scribes believed their inked lines connected heaven and earth, a cosmic ledger balancing human life with divine will. Or maybe they just really hated being yelled at by temple auditors. The boat slides down the river, carrying its message toward another office hundreds of miles away. You imagine the scroll changing hands, from official to priest, from priest to overseer, each adding a note, a mark, a tiny smudge of fingerprint. The document becomes a living thing, passed along, read, stored, reread. You wonder how many papyrus scrolls still lie buried in sand somewhere, waiting to tell the world how many goats were owned by someone named Horemheb 3,000 years ago. The sun lowers and the office slows. One by one, scribes stretch their arms, roll up their scrolls, and tuck their pens behind their ears. Someone yawns so deeply it feels like a contagious ripple through time. You can almost hear their ancient complaints. I've been writing grain tallies all day. My ink dried again. Do you think the gods appreciate this level of paperwork? As the last light fades, you step outside into the cooling air. The sound of the Nile is steady, like a heartbeat underneath everything. You realize that Egypt has just invented not only paper, but something far stranger, the idea that knowledge and power can live on a page. You look up at the stars and picture a cosmic filing cabinet, each constellation a folder labeled in hieroglyphics. Somewhere, the universe itself might be keeping records. How many dreams you've had, how many moments like this you'll remember. And under it all, the faint rustle of papyrus continues, the first quiet chorus of human bureaucracy.
The Nile hums with quiet energy as dawn stretches across the floodplain, gilding the fields in pale gold. You're standing on a raised embankment, watching farmers bend among the stalks of barley. Their motions are rhythmic, almost hypnotic. Cut, bundle, lift. You can smell the sweet green scent of grain mixed with the damp breath of the river. It's harvest season, and every sheaf of wheat will soon find its way into a number, an account, a scroll. Egypt, for all its temples and gods, runs on paperwork now. You follow a procession of ox-drawn carts groaning beneath sacks of grain toward a low, flat building near the river's edge. It's not a temple, no statues of gods, no incense. Instead, the walls are lined with cubbyholes stuffed with papyrus rolls. Inside, scribes perch at long wooden tables, tallying the kingdom's abundance. This is the granary office, the beating heart of Egypt's economy.
a place where floods and fortunes alike are translated into ink and numbers. You lean in close to one scribe as he dips his pen. His desk is cluttered with clay seals, ink jars, and crumbs of dried bread. A fresh sheet of papyrus glows under the morning light. He writes carefully, hieroglyphic script flowing like a calm river. 32 measures from the southern field, 12 from the temple reserve. His handwriting is precise, the lines so straight it feels like even the gods would hesitate to critique. A mainstream historical fact drifts gently through your sleepy curiosity. Each year, the ancient Egyptians recorded the level of the Nile's flood with astonishing accuracy. They used devices called nilometers, stone pillars carved with measurement marks to track how high the water rose. From those readings, officials could predict crop yields, set taxes, and even forecast famines. In other words, your annual spreadsheet for household expenses, they were already doing it 5,000 years ago, only with more crocodiles watching. You wander between tables, hearing the quiet murmur of calculations. Papyrus scrolls pile high like miniature pyramids of bureaucracy. Each represents someone's labor, someone's debt, someone's dinner. You notice small marks, tiny sketches of fish, loaves, or birds, used as pictorial shorthand. It's beautiful, almost artistic, and yet utterly utilitarian. Outside, a barge pulls up to the dock, laden with grain from a distant province. The clerk in charge, a stern man with a shaved head and permanent squint, checks the cargo against his list. "Too light," he mutters. The merchant protests. Voices rise, hands gesture, and for a brief moment, it feels like you're watching the world's first audit unfold in real time. The scribe intervenes, calmly measuring the sacks, making neat notes. The tension melts. Order restored. Bureaucracy triumphs again. And yet, there's something strangely soothing about it all. The Egyptians aren't just counting grain, they're counting stability, survival. Every mark on papyrus ensures the kingdom's rhythm continues. The Nile floods, the land yields, the scribes record. It's as predictable as the sunrise and twice as comforting. You step back, letting the hum of activity wash over you. Somewhere, a young trainee scribe drops his ink pot, splattering black across his pristine papyrus. He freezes, panicked, as the blot spreads like spilled coffee on a white shirt. His supervisor sighs deeply, mutters something that probably translates to "every intern ever," and hands him a new sheet. You can't help but grin. Bureaucracy has patience for numbers, but not for mess. A quirky tidbit floats by, light as dust. Some of the surviving Egyptian records include jokes and side comments scribbled in the margins by board officials. One reads, roughly, "This scribe is lazy," written by, well, probably another scribe. It's an ancient version of office banter, immortalized on papyrus. Somewhere out there, a 5,000-year-old HR complaint is still waiting for resolution. The sun climbs higher, glinting off the river like scattered coins. You wander toward the Nilometer itself, a great stone shaft carved with markings, half submerged in the Nile's edge. A priest stands beside it, chanting softly as he records the level with a measuring rod. 17 cubits, he calls out, a generous flood. The nearby scribes jot it down immediately, sealing the number in ink. That single figure will decide the year's tax rate, the grain storage quotas, and even how many workers will be drafted to repair canals. Historians still argue whether the priesthood used these measurements purely for public good or manipulated them for political control. Maybe they inflated the numbers to claim divine favor, or maybe they simply didn't trust the farmers. You picture a heated debate by torchlight. The river rose 16 cubits. No, 17. The gods said 17. Bureaucracy meets theology. It's a partnership as old as paperwork itself. As dusk settles, the office quiets. Scrolls are sealed with lumps of clay, stamped with the royal falcon. You watch a courier load them onto a barge for transport to the capital. The papyrus rustles softly in the breeze, whispering secrets of the harvest into the night. The courier ties the bundle carefully, muttering a small prayer to Thoth, the god of writing and wisdom, and the closest thing ancient Egypt had to a patron saint of office supplies. You follow him as he pushes off the dock. The water laps gently against the hull, reflecting the sky's fading pink. The courier hums to himself, perhaps unaware that he's carrying the entire kingdom's prosperity in a single scroll case. One misplaced document, one spilled jar of ink, and chaos could ripple through the bureaucracy like a desert storm. You feel a sudden sympathy for every overworked courier who's ever whispered, "Please don't drop this." Night deepens, and in the distance, you see torchlights flicker along the riverbanks. Other offices, other scribes still awake, tallying, recording, sealing. The entire country seems to breathe in rhythm with its paperwork. The Nile, once a symbol of divine abundance, has become the bloodstream of an empire of documents. As you lie back on the deck, the stars above shimmer like scattered ink droplets. You imagine each one as a recorded number, a piece of cosmic data, proof that somewhere even the heavens keep ledgers. The boat drifts downstream, and you feel the quiet pulse of civilization beating steadily beneath you, carried on papyrus, sustained by order, soothed by ink.
By the time you reach Thebes, the air itself seems to buzz with ink and ambition. The city sprawls along the Nile like a living archive, temples, warehouses, administrative buildings, all linked by the same thin thread of papyrus. You step off a barge and immediately feel the hum of organization. Couriers rushing past with scrolls tucked under their arms, scribes calling out to one another, overseers stamping clay seals with the solemnity of priests. Somewhere in the heart of this bureaucratic hive lies the royal archive, the pharaoh's filing cabinet. You head toward it, guided by the faint, papery scent of order. The building looms ahead, long and low, its limestone walls painted with scenes of scribes presenting scrolls to gods. Even the decoration looks like paperwork. Inside, the air is cool and dry. Rows upon rows of shelves line the walls, each filled with neatly rolled papyrus scrolls tied with red or blue cords. The faint rustle of movement echoes through the chamber. A clerk rearranging documents, a guard adjusting his spear, a scribe muttering as he sorts through a pile taller than his patience. You can almost taste the dust of history. One scribe beckons you closer, motioning toward a wooden chest. Inside lie hundreds of scrolls, each marked with the royal seal. He explains, in a voice equal parts pride and exhaustion, that every decree, tax record, trade agreement, and temple inventory is stored here. It's the memory of the entire kingdom, compressed into rolls of dried reeds and soot. A mainstream historical fact surfaces through your sleepy mind. Egypt's great archives were astonishingly advanced. The House of Life, attached to major temples like those in Thebes and Memphis, functioned as both library and record office, preserving not only religious texts, but medical treatises, mathematical tables, and legal documents. The ancient world's first data centers, powered entirely by reed pens and endurance. A scribe unrolls one scroll and shows you lines of graceful hieroglyphics marching across the surface. "Royal decree," he says. The handwriting changes midway, different scribes adding notes and updates. You imagine the endless cycle of revisions, approvals, and signatures, an administrative relay race stretching across centuries. Some scrolls, he tells you, date back to pharaohs long gone. Others contain laws so old that even priests debate their meaning. Bureaucracy, it seems, outlives its creators. A curious detail catches your eye. Many scrolls are sealed with small clay tags hanging from strings, pressed with symbols, falcons, scarabs, ankhs. Each seal identifies a department, an official, or even a date. It's beautiful, but also faintly ridiculous. You realize the pharaoh's government has essentially invented the label maker. Somewhere, an official probably insists that all seals must be aligned exactly 2 fingers apart. The smell in the archive is oddly pleasant, a blend of aged papyrus, resin, and candle wax. You breathe it in deeply, the aroma of civilization organizing itself. Around you, scribes whisper, dip pens, and shuffle scrolls. A few argue quietly over who misplaced the inventory of northern granaries. One man swears he returned it to the correct shelf. Another insists it's been missing since the last flood. The head scribe sighs so deeply it echoes off the stone walls. The ancient equivalent of an office email chain is about to begin. A fringe tidbit floats into your mind. Some papyrus scrolls were so long, over 100 feet, that readers had to unroll them across entire rooms. Imagine trying to find one line in that mess. Historians still argue whether royal scribes developed early cataloging systems or simply relied on memory and divine intervention. One thing's certain, somewhere in these shelves lies a scroll no one's been able to re-roll properly for decades. You trail behind a young apprentice who's carrying a stack of scrolls taller than he is. He staggers under the weight, muttering prayers to Thoth not to trip. You can't help thinking how this might be the oldest known form of carrying your work home. He sets them down on a stone desk and exhales in relief. His supervisor pats him on the shoulder. Egypt's first recorded good job. The archive grows quieter as the sun dips outside. Lamplight flickers across the walls, making the painted hieroglyphics seem to move. You notice a carving of Thoth, the ibis-headed god of wisdom, holding a scribe's palette. His eyes seem to follow you, amused, as if he's seen every bureaucratic disaster in history and still finds it funny. You whisper a small thank you to him anyway, just in case. Then from deeper in the archive, a commotion breaks out. 2 scribes are arguing over the correct placement of a decree. One insists it belongs in the Royal Decrees Agriculture section. Another claims it's part of religious taxation special exceptions. The debate escalates. Hands wave, scrolls unfurl, tempers rise. You swear you hear someone mutter, "We need a new filing system." It's comforting, really, proof that even the ancients suffered under categorization chaos. Eventually, a senior priest intervenes, settling the dispute with a shrug. Let the gods decide, which, translated into modern terms, means we'll deal with it never. The scribes nod solemnly and return to work. You wander through the aisles one last time, fingertips brushing over the smooth papyrus edges. Each scroll hums with human effort, the scratch of pens, the sighs of late nights, the rustle of organization. Somewhere outside, the pharaoh himself sleeps soundly, oblivious that his entire rule depends on the careful stacking of these fragile scrolls. Historians still argue whether the Egyptians truly grasped how revolutionary papyrus was. To them, it may have just been another tool, another way to honor the gods through order. But to you, standing here under flickering lamplight, it feels like a miracle, a civilization learning how to remember itself. The lamps burn lower. The last clerk seals the final scroll of the night, pressing a falcon symbol into soft clay. He exhales and murmurs, "All accounted for." The quiet hum of the archive settles into stillness, like the final page closing. You step outside, greeted by the cool breath of the Nile night. The stars above glitter like the holes in an old filing cabinet, letting heaven's light peek through. Behind you, the pharaoh's papers rest safe and silent, waiting for the next sunrise, the next decree, the next endless list. And for a moment, you think, maybe civilization didn't begin with fire or stone tools. Maybe it began here, in the rustle of papyrus under a tired scribe's hand.
By the time dawn warms the edges of the Nile again, you're still in Thebes, but now you find yourself sitting in a quiet corner of the scribe school, a place where the next generation of pen-wielding bureaucrats are molded. The morning air smells faintly of dust and ink, and the rhythmic tapping of reed pens echoes like rain on stone. You can practically hear the collective sigh of children realizing they've enrolled in the ancient world's most exhausting homework club. A teacher paces up and down the rows of low desks, his papyrus scroll rolled under one arm like a weapon of instruction. The students, all boys with shaved heads and furrowed brows, are hunched over wooden tablets coated with plaster, copying hieroglyphs again and again. A good scribe, the teacher drones, writes as neatly as Thoth himself. You can tell most of the class would rather be out by the river catching fish or, frankly, doing anything else. The mainstream fact of the day? The Egyptians really did establish formal schools for scribes, houses of instruction attached to temples or government offices. Only the most promising and most patient young minds were admitted, since writing wasn't just a skill, it was a sacred duty. The scribe was both bureaucrat and priest, keeper of order in ink form. If the pharaoh's word was divine, then the scribe's pen was its messenger. You glance around the classroom and notice a tall boy frowning at his work. His hieroglyphs wobble unevenly, and the teacher smacks his shoulder lightly with the scroll. "Crooked hands make crooked taxes," he warns. Somewhere in the corner, another student muffles a giggle. You imagine that in every era, every classroom, there's always that one kid who finds humor in discipline. The teacher, clearly long-suffering, sets down a jar of black ink and points to a large wall chart. Rows of symbols, birds, snakes, eyes, each drawn perfectly. He says, "You will copy this 100 times. The class groans. You sympathize. If you had to draw the same owl 50 times before lunch, you'd start questioning your life choices too. Still, there's something strangely soothing about the rhythm of it all. The soft scratch of reed on plaster, the faint murmur of concentration, the way dust motes drift lazily in the slanting sunlight. You lean back and almost drift off as the teacher drones about verb tenses in Middle Egyptian. A fringe tidbit surfaces. The Egyptians had a phrase, "Writing causes remembrance," and they meant it literally. To forget how to write was to vanish from the record of eternity. That's why scribes were sometimes buried with their writing tools. Ink and memory went hand in hand. Some tombs have been found where tiny papyrus fragments were tucked beside mummified fingers, as if to ensure the afterlife had proper documentation. The day stretches long and hot. The students practice dictation now. One recites aloud, "The farmer delivers 10 measures of barley," while others scribble furiously, struggling to keep pace. You watch the sweat bead on their brows. It's a test not just of writing skill, but endurance. The same focus you'd need centuries later to survive a corporate spreadsheet marathon. The teacher calls for a break, and the students slump with relief. A few sneak outside to splash their faces with water. You follow, stepping into a courtyard where reeds dry in bundles against the wall. The smell of damp papyrus hits you again, earthy, grassy, faintly sweet. It's oddly comforting, like the scent of fresh stationery before an exam you're not prepared for. One of the apprentices, maybe 12 years old, approaches you, shyly. He holds out his practice board. "Do you read?" he asks, eager for praise. You nod, pretending to study the symbols. They're wobbly, but sincere. "Very good," you tell him softly. His grin lights up the courtyard like morning itself. That's the thing about scribes. They believed that writing wasn't just work, but power. To make a mark on papyrus was to leave a trace of your soul behind. The sun climbs higher, and the teacher gathers the class again. He begins reciting a passage known among Egyptologists as the satire of the trades. You recognize it instantly, the most famous scribe propaganda of all time. It's basically a 4,000-year-old career day speech designed to convince students that every other job is awful. He reads, "The carpenter smells of pitch, the cobbler's hands are filthy, the fisherman is wretched and weak, but the scribe sits inside, his body sleek, his clothes clean, and his mind sharp." You can't help but chuckle. It's ancient copywriting at its finest. Be a scribe, because dirt is for peasants. Historians still argue whether this satire was meant sincerely or sarcastically. Was it genuinely a recruitment pitch, or was the author a tired teacher trying to make himself feel better about grading bad handwriting for eternity? Either way, the students nod solemnly. The dream of indoor work and a full lunch break has always had universal appeal. Later in the afternoon, the apprentices gather around a table stacked with blank papyrus sheets. The teacher dips a brush into ink,
and demonstrates how to prepare a document for official use. He says, "First, we draw the margins, so the gods see that we respect order. Then we write the date, the name of the scribe, and a brief summary of contents." You realize this is the ancestor of the modern header. The first ancient memo is being born before your eyes. He lifts his brush and adds a small doodle of Thoth in the corner. "For luck," he murmurs. The class copies him. I smile at the idea that even in a world ruled by gods, bureaucrats still hedge their bets with a tiny mascot. The day ends with the students rolling up their practice sheets. Some smudge their ink, others carefully stack theirs to dry. The teacher watches them file out, muttering, "Perhaps one will serve the palace someday." I suspect he says that every night, half hope, half habit. You linger a little longer as the light softens. The quiet hum of learning fades, replaced by the faint rustle of palm leaves outside. You think about all those young scribes, thousands of them over centuries, copying, reciting, memorizing, until their handwriting became the machinery of empire. The first office culture wasn't born in a boardroom. It was built right here, on the backs of children who learned how to draw the world into order. As you walk away, the smell of ink and papyrus clings to you like a faint perfume of memory. Somewhere behind you, the teacher is already unrolling tomorrow's lessons. He says softly to himself, "The pen is sharper than the chisel." You smile. He doesn't know it yet, but in a few millennia, his students' neat little lines will still be whispering from museum glass, proof that bureaucracy, for better or worse, might just be humanity's longest love affair.
By now, you've followed the ink trail from the classroom to the beating heart of government, Memphis, the ancient capital. It's here that papyrus, pens, and patience converge into something more formidable, the bureaucracy that keeps Egypt's monumental machine running. You arrive just as the morning rush begins. The city hums with scribes balancing stacks of scrolls, clerks arguing over taxes, and overseers shouting at each other about missing grain tallies. You realize you've stumbled into humanity's first office rush hour. You follow a weary-looking official through a stone corridor into the House of Records. The name alone feels heavy. Inside, sunlight filters through narrow windows, illuminating long tables piled with scrolls. There's no coffee, but everyone looks like they desperately need one. The air smells like dust, sweat, and bureaucracy. Somehow, you can already feel your shoulders tense. Here, the mainstream historical fact lands quietly but powerfully. Egypt's bureaucracy was one of the most complex in the ancient world. Each region had its own scribes and administrators, all reporting up the chain to the vizier, the pharaoh's right-hand man and head of all paperwork. Taxes, land grants, census counts, even cow births, everything had to be documented on papyrus. If the Nile rose too high or too low, there was a scroll for that too. Nothing escaped the record. You wander past a group of scribes recording grain measurements. Each man dips his reed pen, writes a few careful lines, then blows gently to dry the ink. One mutters, "We'll run out of space before the harvest ends." His partner replies, "Then we'll start on the backside." You can't help but think they've just invented the first double-sided printing. Somewhere in the corner, a clerk sneezes loudly, perhaps the earliest recorded case of papyrus dust allergies. The vizier's office is an organized chaos. His desk, made of dark cedar, is buried under neatly stacked scrolls bound with colored cords. Each color means something different: red for taxes, blue for temple affairs, yellow for military reports. The vizier himself sits serenely amid it all, eyes scanning a decree. His calm makes you nervous. It's the same expression every manager wears right before saying, "Can I see you in my office?" He gestures for you to approach. "We keep Egypt's heartbeat steady," he says softly. "Every scroll, every number, every name, order must be maintained." You nod, wondering if he truly believes that, or if it's just what he tells himself while drowning in ink. As he speaks, an assistant rushes in, out of breath. "Sir, the scribe from the northern granaries. He's missing 3 measures of barley." The vizier sighs deeply. You've heard that sigh before, the universal sound of someone realizing their afternoon just got longer. "Tell him to find them, or find another job," the vizier says. You trail after the assistant, curious. Outside, scribes gather around long wooden tables under shade awnings. They work in teams, one dictating, one writing, another checking the numbers. It's a sight both fascinating and oddly familiar, ancient Egypt's version of a data entry department. You imagine the whispered jokes, the petty rivalries, the quiet triumphs when the math finally adds up. Bureaucracy might be dull, but it's undeniably human. Here comes the quirky tidbit. Scribes often wrote letters to one another in the most passive-aggressive tones imaginable. Actual surviving papyri include complaints like, "I sent you 10 measures of grain, yet you claim to have received only 8. My assistant swears by Ra that you lie." It's official. The first inter-office feud existed long before email. Historians still argue whether these bureaucratic systems were as efficient as they appeared, or if they mostly survived through ritual and redundancy. Some believe the endless recording was a form of religious devotion, a way to impose divine order on chaos. Others think it was just paperwork for paperwork's sake. You suspect both are true. The gods, after all, seem to love forms in triplicate. You stop by a small chamber filled with clerks copying older scrolls onto fresh papyrus. It's a strange sight, rewriting the past to preserve the present. One man murmurs, "The ink fades, but not the word." You wonder if he knows how poetic that sounds, or if it's just his excuse for being behind schedule. Another scribe explains how they keep track of everything. Every month, tallies are made: grain, cattle, gold, even human labor. The records are then sealed and sent to the temple archives. If someone steals a cow or forgets to pay tax, the scroll can prove it. Accountability, ancient style. You're tempted to ask if anyone ever audits the auditors, but decide you like your head where it is. The noise in the hall grows as more officials arrive, carrying fresh complaints and longer lists. A runner bursts in holding a scroll dripping with wax. "Urgent order from the pharaoh," he cries. Everyone stops. The vizier breaks the seal and reads aloud, "A new decree for increased grain distribution." The scribes groan. More work. You realize that even divine mandates come with paperwork. Outside, the city is alive with the ripple effect of ink. Messengers sprint to temples, merchants recalculate their ledgers, and farmers adjust their rations. Every pen stroke here has consequences miles away. Civilization, you think, is nothing but a long line of people waiting for someone else to stamp approval. You wander past a small courtyard where a pair of older scribes take a break. They sit in the shade, sharing a jug of beer. "You think this will all last?" one asks. The other chuckles. "Of course, as long as there's something to count, there will be someone to count it." They clink clay cups together, the first recorded toast to job security. The sun lowers, staining the limestone pink. The vizier's staff begins packing up, carefully stacking scrolls back into clay jars for safekeeping. Each jar is labeled by date and subject, forming neat rows like obedient soldiers. You watch as one scribe hums softly, sealing a jar with a smile. Maybe he's proud, or maybe he's just relieved the day is finally over. The house of records grows quiet. The last beam of sunlight touches a shelf, illuminating the faint gold threads of papyrus fiber. You think of how fragile it all is. One flood, one fire, and centuries of thought could vanish. And yet somehow they kept writing, line after line, day after day. As you step back into the warm evening, the hum of the office fades behind you. The smell of ink lingers on your hands, and for a moment you feel oddly connected, not to gods or pharaohs, but to every tired worker who's ever stayed late finishing something that felt important at the time. The bureaucracy of Egypt wasn't glamorous, but it was the backbone of empire, the quiet machinery that made the pyramids possible, one papyrus sheet at a time. And tomorrow, when the sun rises again over the Nile, they'll do it all over.
When the sun next climbs above the slow-gliding Nile, you find yourself far from the marble offices of Memphis. The view has shifted. Now you stand on the edge of a granary complex in the fertile delta, where papyrus meets practicality. Here, bureaucracy spills out of the temples and into the dirt. The air smells of wheat dust, baked clay, and the faint tang of river mud. You're about to witness the paperwork of empire in its most physical form, counting the kingdom's food. The foreman greets you with a weary smile. "Welcome to the treasury of grain," he says, spreading his arms like a man presenting both pride and headache. Behind him, rows of domed silos stretch into the distance, each one painted with simple tally marks. Workers haul sacks of barley on their shoulders, dumping them into bins under the watchful eyes of scribes perched at small wooden tables. You realize this place isn't just a storehouse, it's a living spreadsheet. A mainstream historical fact surfaces like a memory. Egypt's economy revolved around grain. Taxes weren't paid in coins, but in measures of wheat and barley. Every harvest was weighed, recorded, and redistributed under the pharaoh's command. Papyrus made this possible. Without records, the system would collapse into chaos. You could say these silos were the ancient world's version of the cloud, except made of mud brick and occasionally raided by hippos. You follow a scribe as he inspects a wagon of freshly delivered grain. He squats, runs his fingers through the kernels, and notes the texture. Then, with meticulous care, he dips his reed pen into ink and writes, 20 baskets, Lower Nile, good quality. He hands the scroll to a clerk who stamps it with a clay seal. Two men nearby whisper about whether the ink will dry before the next shipment. You smile, the timeless struggle of documentation keeping up with delivery. Nearby, a group of farmers stand in line, waiting to have their quotas recorded. Each holds a small token, a clay chit marked with symbols that represents their contribution. The clerk calls them forward one by one, checks the grain, and issues a receipt on papyrus. You realize you're watching the birth of bureaucracy's favorite invention, the paper trail. A fringe tidbit floats through your drowsy thoughts. Archaeologists once uncovered ancient complaint letters from farmers to officials about unfair grain assessments. One document reads, "My barley was measured short, though my field was blessed by Hapi himself." Even 3,000 years ago, someone was already yelling, "Check the numbers again!" Historians still argue whether these grievances were ever truly resolved, or if they simply vanished into dusty archives like every ignored email since. The foreman leads you to the weighing area, where workers lift huge baskets onto scales balanced with stone weights. The scribe beside him calls out numbers, his tone brisk and musical. 5, 10, 12, mark it. His assistant scribbles, eyes half-lidded with fatigue. You realize the cadence is hypnotic, the rhythm of record-keeping. You could almost fall asleep to it, the way you might to the ticking of a clock or the gentle hum of a fan. Every so often, the foreman adjusts a weight, muttering to himself, "We can't cheat the measure. The gods see all." You wonder if that's faith or just good management strategy. As the sun burns higher, the activity hums faster. Couriers arrive with scrolls from nearby villages, each sealed with wax and string.
One by one, the scribes unroll and review them, murmuring updates to the ledger. Shipment received from Hut Netter, 25 sacks, noted. Occasionally someone sighs, "We're missing the Nubian delivery again." You can tell that even divine administration can't escape supply chain delays. You pause to watch a younger scribe repairing a torn document. He carefully moistens the papyrus edge and presses another piece over it, smoothing the seam with a polished shell. Accidents happen, but records must live longer than we do. There's pride in his voice, maybe even love. You wonder if he knows that someday, long after his name is forgotten, the scroll he's mending might sit under museum glass, still legible. Lunch comes late. The workers sit in a circle, eating bread and dried fish. The scribes eat apart under a shaded canopy, guarding their scrolls even as they rest. You overhear one of them joke, "We record the food, but we never get enough of it." Another chuckles, "At least the ink doesn't spoil." You can almost hear the ancient equivalent of office sarcasm. As you walk along the line of silos, the foreman points toward a large carved tablet on the wall. It shows a list of hieroglyphs, names, numbers, dates. He explains, "That's last season's record. We carved it so the scribes can't change it later." A permanent audit log, carved in stone. You grin. Somewhere, an accountant from the 21st century is nodding in approval. The afternoon drifts by in golden heat. The scribes continue writing, occasionally brushing flies from their faces. One stops to sharpen his reed pen with a small knife. The sound, scrape, scrape, scratch, blends into the low murmur of counting. You can almost imagine time itself being tallied, moment by moment. Another odd tidbit emerges from your thoughts. Certain temples employed grain priests whose sole job was to bless storage facilities and ensure accurate records. Some even performed rituals with small offerings of flour, asking the gods to protect the ledgers from decay. Historians still argue whether this was genuine devotion or just a clever way to justify overtime pay. As the day fades, you climb the steps of a nearby storehouse to watch the workers below. From up here, the scene looks almost ceremonial. Lines of men moving in rhythm, scribes marking in unison, the whole process unfolding like a hymn to order. You feel the weight of it, the beauty in something so mundane, the quiet divinity of counting things properly. The foreman joins you, stretching his back. "It never ends," he says, half smiling. "By the time we finish counting this harvest, it'll be time for the next." You nod, thinking that maybe this endless cycle of counting and writing is what truly kept Egypt alive, not the pharaoh's might, but the quiet persistence of men with pens. As dusk settles, the last scroll is tied shut, the last seal pressed. The workers file home, and the silos fall silent under the fading pink light. The foreman pats the wall, almost affectionately. "All recorded," he murmurs. You realize it's more than a statement. It's a prayer, a promise that nothing will be forgotten. You turn toward the river. The papyrus reeds sway in the twilight breeze, whispering against each other, like pages turning. Somewhere downriver, another scribe dips his pen and begins again. Civilization keeps its balance, one careful line at a time.
Night falls again over the Nile, and you find yourself drifting toward a place where paperwork takes on a more sacred hue, the temple archives. The air here is thicker, heavy with incense and silence. Each step you take echoes between tall columns painted with blue and gold hieroglyphs, and you realize that this is not just an office, it's a sanctuary of order, where gods and government meet in the language of ink. A priest scribe greets you, his head shaved smooth, his robes spotless white. He doesn't bow, he simply gestures for you to follow, his sandals whispering across the polished floor. "Here," he says softly, "we keep the words of the gods and the deeds of men." The two, you notice, seem to occupy the same shelf. You step into a long, narrow chamber lit by flickering oil lamps. Rows of scrolls are stored in wooden cubbies along the walls, each labeled in graceful script. The air smells faintly of papyrus dust and sandalwood. Somewhere deeper inside, a faint scratch of writing echoes, the soft heartbeat of divine documentation. A mainstream historical fact hums through your mind. Major temples in Egypt, like those of Karnak and Abydos, maintained vast archives that served both religious and administrative purposes. They kept everything from hymns and medical formulas to tax ledgers and construction orders. The priests here were not just servants of the gods, they were the kingdom's archivists, ensuring that what was promised to the gods was actually delivered. You pause before a table where two scribes are at work. One recites from memory while the other writes, his pen gliding steadily. A jar of honey to the temple of Hathor, 2 baskets of figs, 4 loaves, 3 cups of wine. The writer nods, marking each gift. You can't help but think, this is the first ancient audit. Somewhere an accountant's heart flutters across the millennia. The senior scribe looks up at you. Every offering, he says, must be written, or it's as if it never happened. His tone is calm, but his eyes burn with conviction. You glance at the wall beside him, painted scenes of gods weighing hearts against feathers. It occurs to you that Egypt's obsession with balance wasn't just spiritual, it was administrative. A quirky tidbit bubbles up. Archaeologists have found papyrus fragments listing temple supplies that include improbable items, such as 12 jars of honey for a single day, or enough incense to fumigate half of Thebes. Scholars still debate whether this was clerical error or divine exaggeration. Perhaps the gods had sweet teeth, or maybe someone was padding the numbers, one historian once joked. The priest-scribe leads you to another chamber where the air cools noticeably. Stone shelves line the walls, each holding clay jars sealed with wax. These, he says, are the oldest records. Some are from kings whose names even we can't read. He picks one up carefully, the seal still intact. The faint imprint of a falcon gleams in the lamplight. You see, he says, the word of Pharaoh preserved like the breath of Ra. He sets it down gently, almost reverently. Without these, he continues, the kingdom forgets what it owes, to gods, to people, to itself. You feel the weight of that sentence. Civilization survives because someone bothers to keep the receipts. As you walk deeper into the archive, you notice the strange tranquility that settles over you. The faint scratching of pens, the low murmur of recitation, it's almost meditative, the rhythm of order. You imagine how many centuries this sound has endured, unchanged, echoing through dynasties like a lullaby for the gods. One of the younger scribes stops to stretch his back. Sometimes he admits, I dream of the Nile, not these walls. His companion chuckles, then dream faster, this ink dries quick. Their laughter is soft, like the rustle of scrolls. You realize that even in sacred halls, bureaucracy still breeds the same weary humor. Historians still argue whether temple scribes saw themselves as divine intermediaries or merely civil servants. Some evidence suggests they considered writing itself a sacred act, the act of capturing divine speech. Others think they were just very diligent record keepers who happened to have good lighting and job security. Either way, you sense they found meaning in their monotony. The priest-scribe shows you a large papyrus spread out on a table.
The writing is fine and dense, full of lists, livestock counts, donations, festival supplies. But along the margins, tiny doodles, birds, eyes, even what looks like a cat peek out. You smile. "Ah," he says, following your gaze, "our young scribes sometimes add personal touches." You wonder how many bored interns throughout history have done exactly the same. He leads you outside for a moment into the temple courtyard. The stars burn overhead, their reflection rippling in the sacred pool. The gods, he murmurs, do not forget, but men do. So we write. The words settle into the night like sand after a wave. You think of the hundreds of hands that wrote before his, and the thousands that will come after, each one trying to preserve what slips away so easily. Back inside, the priests extinguish lamps one by one. The chamber darkens until only one flame remains, flickering over a half-finished scroll. You can just make out the last line written that day. All is in order. You linger, half entranced by the glow. The ink gleams faintly in the light, and for a moment you think you can almost see the words breathing. It's not divine magic, it's the strange miracle of memory, bound to paper and kept alive by people who believed that forgetting was the first step toward chaos. The last lamp sputters out. The priest-scribe bows his head and whispers, "Tomorrow we begin again." You step outside into the night air. The city sleeps. The river sighs. Behind you, the temple keeps its silent vigil. Scrolls resting like the dreams of gods, ready to be awakened by dawn and ink once more.
Morning light creeps back across the Nile, gilding the reeds that sway along its banks. You awaken to the hum of activity, a different kind of bustle, not divine this time, but deeply, deliciously mundane. Men are shouting, donkeys are braying, and boats creak as they're loaded with bundles of freshly cut papyrus stalks. The riverfront feels alive, like a market crossed with an office supply store from 3,000 years ago. This is the papyrus industry in full swing. It's easy to forget when you see an ancient scroll in a museum that it all started here, with farmers and craftsmen knee-deep in marsh water, slicing reeds under the same sun that once warmed pharaohs. A young worker waves to you, holding up a dripping stalk. "Good harvest this year," he shouts proudly. "Plenty for the temples, and maybe even for the Greeks." He laughs, though he probably doesn't realize that centuries later, those same Greeks will try, and fail, to replicate this art. The papyrus plant, Cyprus papyrus, was once the green lifeline of Egypt. It wasn't just for writing. People made boats, mats, sandals, even food from it. But the writing sheets? Those were gold. Or rather, they became gold once temple monopolies and royal taxes got involved. You follow a boatman as he pulls his barge toward Memphis, its cargo stacked high with bundled stalks. The sun glints on the water, and you can smell the faint sweetness of crushed reeds. At the docks, merchants argue good-naturedly over weight and price, voices rising like seagulls. It's an oddly familiar chaos, something between a stock exchange and a farmer's market. By midday, you reach a small workshop, half shaded by a canopy of woven palm leaves. Inside, men sit cross-legged on the floor, pressing strips of papyrus in neat rows. Others layer them crosswise, pounding gently with smooth stones. The rhythmic tap, tap, tap blends with the sound of cicadas and water splashing outside. It's oddly soothing. One craftsman grins at you and says, "The secret is in the glue." He gestures toward a bowl of cloudy water. It's not glue at all, just the sap from the reed itself. Nature does the work if you're patient. He shrugs. But patience is taxed too. Indeed, by the time these sheets dry and get cut, stamped, and sold, nearly everyone has taken a slice. Local governors, temple officials, royal clerks. Papyrus became so valuable that production was tightly controlled, especially near Alexandria. For centuries, it was Egypt's most guarded export, much like silk in China. You picture foreign traders arriving from Greece or Syria, eager to buy scrolls for their philosophers or poets. The Egyptians, wise to their desperation, sometimes sent lower quality sheets, coarse and brittle, nicknamed the Second Harvest. You can almost hear the ancient complaints. "This papyrus tears faster than my patience." A merchant shows you his stock proudly. The finest grade, he explains, is called Augustan, smooth and pale like cream. Below that are hieratic, amphitheatrica, and finally emporetica, the cheap stuff used for grocery lists and love notes that were probably best forgotten. Nearby, a group of workers tie finished scrolls with thin cords, stacking them in crates marked with ink symbols, an early version of barcodes. One crate is labeled for the Library of Alexandria. The merchant sighs. They buy everything and never return a single scroll. You chuckle softly. The library's reputation for confiscating every book that entered the city was legendary. Ships docking at the harbor were searched and their scrolls copied or seized for the good of knowledge. It's comforting to know that intellectual piracy has a long, noble tradition. The economic importance of papyrus wasn't just about trade, it shaped literacy, law, and even corruption. In temple towns, papyrus rationing could mean power. Those who controlled the supply decided whose voice got written, whose contracts existed, whose names endured. Paper wasn't just paper, it was permission. As the afternoon wanes, you find a shade and watch a papyrus sheet drying in the breeze. Sunlight filters through its thin fibers, revealing a delicate lattice of pale gold. You imagine how many human stories would pass across that surface. Love letters, tax receipts, royal decrees, grocery lists, all equally fragile, all in their own way immortal. A small boy runs past, carrying a bundle of reeds almost as tall as himself. His father laughs, shouting, "Careful, that's next month's taxes." He grins and keeps running. You can't help but smile. Bureaucracy, it seems, always starts young. As evening settles, you hear the workers packing up, their laughter mixing with the soft hiss of the river. The workshop quiets. A single craftsman stays behind, brushing dust from a finished scroll. He holds it up to the fading light, squints, and murmurs, "Perfect." You realize he's not admiring his handiwork so much as paying respect to something older, larger, the unbroken tradition of recording thought on something that can crumble between your fingers. Somewhere downriver, a scribe will soon unroll that same sheet, dip his pen in ink, and begin writing about the harvest, the gods, or the weather. And perhaps centuries later, archaeologists will find that scrap buried in sand and call it Fragment 42, Inventory of Fish and Onions. You close your eyes and let the sound of the river lull you again. The papyrus rustles in the breeze, whispering secrets of trade, craft, and the soft tyranny of documentation. If paper is the skin of civilization, then Egypt was its first heartbeat. Night folds gently over the workshops, and you find yourself walking under a sky brushed with violet and bronze. The air cools, the frogs resume their rhythmic chorus, and in the distance you see a flicker of torchlight deep inside a stone corridor. It's not a temple this time, it's a tomb under construction, and you're about to see where paperwork meets eternity.
You duck beneath the low lintel, the smell of dust and oil lamps thick in the air. Artists and scribes huddled together, copying lines from an older scroll onto the freshly plastered wall. The flickering light makes the painted symbols shimmer as though they might whisper back. You realize the scroll in their hands isn't a royal decree, it's a manual for the afterlife. The Egyptians, ever organized, even documented how to die properly. This is the Book of the Dead, or as scribes called it, the Book of Going Forth by Day. Each spell and instruction, written carefully in black and red ink on rolls of papyrus, served as the ultimate checklist, sort of like an ancient how to navigate eternity for dummies. You can almost hear a scribe muttering, "Spell 125 again? Why do they always want spell 125? The main scribe pauses, stretching his cramped fingers. You notice the papyrus scroll unrolled before him, meticulously lined with hieroglyphs and small illustrations. Each line represents hours of work, and he looks both proud and tired. He's aware, perhaps, that what he's writing will be sealed in a tomb, never read again by mortal eyes. Yet he writes with the same precision as if the pharaoh himself were watching. Papyrus isn't just for bureaucracy, it's sacred. It bridges the world of accounting and eternity. The same material used for tax ledgers also carries prayers to Osiris. Somewhere, a poor farmer might be fined for late grain delivery on Monday and have his funeral spells copied onto the same plant fiber by Friday. Continuity, Egyptian style. You wander deeper into the chamber, past painted gods and gold leaf, until you find a crate of unused scrolls. Each one is rolled tightly, bound with cord, and labeled with a smear of red pigment, probably indicating the owner's name. It's a quiet moment of revelation. This tomb is as much an archive as a resting place. Bureaucracy doesn't die, it just changes departments. Outside, the Nile gleams faintly under the moonlight. You follow it north, toward a city buzzing even after sunset. Thebes, perhaps, or Memphis. There, papyrus takes on another life. In back rooms of small shops, merchants copy contracts, receipts, and love letters. A couple argues faintly over an agreement. He insists the price for his donkey was 4 debens. She swears it was 5. A scribe sits between them, sighing softly as if to say, "Some disputes are eternal." He records both sides anyway, rolls up the papyrus, seals it with clay, and presses a ring into the soft surface. Just like that, an ordinary moment becomes history. A fragment of such a contract might survive millennia. Archaeologists today still unroll papyri from ancient rubbish heaps, reading everything from epic poetry to shopping lists like bread, beer, onions, and 2 jars of honey. You can imagine the weary housewife muttering, "And don't forget the honey this time." Historians still argue whether papyrus documents were treated as temporary or eternal. Some were reused, scraped clean and overwritten, a thrifty practice known as palimpsests. Others were buried reverently, as if paper itself had a soul. In both cases, the Egyptian instinct to preserve information, even mundane, feels eerily modern. You drift now into the Temple of Thoth, god of wisdom and writing. Its walls echo with the scratch of hundreds of styluses. A priest dips his pen, recording lunar phases on papyrus sheets for the agricultural calendar. Another notes the day's offerings, goats, grain, a necklace, and a small misunderstanding about who was supposed to bring the necklace. All these documents, religious, commercial, personal, accumulate like sediment along the riverbed of time. Papyrus scrolls are stored in jars, cabinets, even under floors. Some temples develop catalog systems, with clerks tracking which document goes where. You imagine one exhausted scribe muttering, "If one more priest asks me to find the list of cows donated by Amenhotep III, I swear I'll turn into a cow myself." But even the most jaded scribe knows the truth. Knowledge survives through ink and fiber. Without papyrus, memory would dissolve into sand. You stroll past an archive chamber and see clerks stacking scrolls vertically in pigeonhole-style shelves. The smell of resin, papyrus, and faint mildew hangs in the air. Each scroll bears a small tag of papyrus with its title written in red, an early form of labeling. Somewhere in there might be love poems to Hathor, receipts for beer rations, or philosophical musings about why crocodiles get such special treatment from the gods. You realize how seamlessly bureaucracy and belief intertwine. Every offering has a receipt. Every prayer has a ledger. Even the dead have documentation. It's strangely comforting, orderliness even in the afterlife. Outside, dawn begins to stir again. A cart creaks by, loaded with newly made scrolls destined for another scribe's table. You catch a glimpse of one partially unrolled, a letter from a soldier to his mother, written neatly in Demotic script. He tells her not to worry, that he's eating well, that the campaign isn't too hard. Then, almost shyly, he adds, "Please send more socks." You smile. Millennia later, someone will read that line and chuckle the same way. Humanity, it seems, doesn't change much, just the stationery. The wind picks up, fluttering a loose scrap of papyrus across the sand. It lands by your feet, faint ink barely legible. You crouch to see it. Just a small list of provisions: figs, oil, linen, and ink. Simple, ordinary, and somehow deeply beautiful. In that moment, you understand the heart of Egypt's genius. It wasn't only the pyramids or the temples, it was their belief that words, once written, could outlast flesh, that order and chaos could be balanced not just by gods, but by careful handwriting. You let the scrap drift away on the breeze, feeling the quiet satisfaction of a story still unfolding, one line at a time.
The morning light breaks again over the Nile, but this time you're not standing in Egypt anymore. The breeze smells different, saltier, brisker, touched by the sea. Somewhere ahead lies a ship laden with papyrus scrolls, bound for foreign ports. The ancient Egyptian monopoly is about to meet the rest of the ancient world, and it won't always go smoothly. You find yourself aboard a wooden merchant galley, its deck piled high with crates. Inside them, papyrus sheets are rolled and tied, destined for scholars, accountants, and bureaucrats from Greece to Rome. The captain, a wiry man with sun-bleached hair, grins at you. "They'll pay anything for this stuff," he says, patting a crate. "They can't get enough of it. Try writing your philosophy on goat hide. It's like scratching on a shoe." He's right. Across the Mediterranean, people are desperate to emulate Egypt's miracle paper. The Greeks adore it, the Romans depend on it, and the merchants who ferry it grow rich. In Athens, playwrights scrawl tragedies onto Egyptian scrolls. In Rome, senators draft laws that affect millions on Egyptian fiber. Papyrus, that humble swamp plant, has become the lifeblood of empires. You disembark in the bustling port of Piraeus. The smell of fish, olive oil, and fresh parchment hits you all at once. Greek scribes rush through the streets, ink-stained and argumentative. One man proudly displays his latest import. "Alexandrian papyrus, smooth as Athena's cheek," he boasts. His rival smirks.
until it molds in our damp air. Then what? They bicker, of course. Scholars still argue whether papyrus truly suited the Greek climate. Egypt's dry heat preserved it beautifully, but in the humid Mediterranean, scrolls decayed quickly, turning soft and fragile. Some philosophers complained their notes literally dissolved before the next symposium. You can almost imagine one sighing, "There goes my life's work, back to the swamp." Still, the Greeks couldn't resist. They adapted Egyptian methods, trying to grow papyrus in the Nile Delta's cousins, swampy corners of Crete, Sicily, and Syria. The results? Mediocre at best. The plants withered, the sheets fell apart, and Egyptian traders laughed all the way to the bank. A few daring innovators tried alternatives: thin leather, tree bark, even woven linen. The Greeks experimented with wax tablets for short notes, a sort of reusable notepad. You picture a young philosopher scratching, "Call Socrates, read dinner," before wiping it clean again. Convenient, yes, but hardly poetic. Eventually, Greek copycats found their rhythm. They introduced codices, books made of folded papyrus sheets bound at one edge. It was a small revolution, allowing readers to flip through pages rather than unroll meters of text. Practical, elegant, and still dependent on Egyptian exports. The empire of reeds endured. Then Rome arrived. The Romans didn't just admire Egyptian papyrus, they industrialized it. Bureaucracy was their religion, paperwork was their scripture. In every office, from the Senate to the smallest outpost, papyrus flowed like wine. Military reports, tax receipts, property deeds, everything recorded, sealed, and filed. The phrase, "in triplicate," might as well have been carved on their coins. You walk through a Roman office in Alexandria, perhaps one of the busiest in the world. Clerks sit shoulder to shoulder at long wooden tables, copying census records. Wax tablets clatter. Ink pots line the shelves. The smell of sweat, ink, and ambition fills the room. One official waves a scroll irritably. "This one's from Egypt, yes, but cheaper stock. You can see the fibers." Another replies dryly, "Then order better bribes next time." They laugh. Bureaucracy transcends borders. Despite their love for papyrus, Romans eventually began to face the same problem the Greeks did: fragility. Their damp northern provinces made scrolls rot faster than reputations. Enter the rival: parchment. Parchment, made from treated animal skins, was thicker, more durable, and immune to mildew. In Pergamum, a city in Asia Minor, craftsmen perfected it until it rivaled papyrus in smoothness. The story goes that Egypt, fearing the competition, banned papyrus exports to Pergamum entirely. Historians still argue whether that ban really happened, but the legend stuck. Scarcity drives innovation. Pergamum turned the shortage into an advantage, birthing the Codex Revolution that would eventually replace papyrus altogether. You picture a Pergamum craftsman stretching a sheet of calfskin taut on a frame, scraping it smooth. Let Egypt have their reeds. We have goats and patience. Meanwhile, in Rome, librarians worried about supply shortages. Scribes whispered about dwindling shipments from the Nile as political tensions flared. A senator grumbles, "If we cannot write our laws, we cannot enforce them." Another retorts, "If we cannot enforce them, we might as well stop writing." The empire, built on ink and scrolls, began to wobble under its own paperwork. Yet papyrus never vanished overnight. Even as parchment gained prestige, papyrus remained the paper of the people, the affordable option, the everyday medium for letters, receipts, and love notes. In Pompeii, archaeologists found carbonized papyri still legible after 2,000 years, blackened but whispering the names of poets and merchants. You find one fragment in your mind's eye, its script faint but graceful. "Tell my brother not to worry. The shipment of olives will arrive soon. A normal line from a normal life, preserved by tragedy. Papyrus outlived empires because it served ordinary needs. The Greeks philosophized on it. The Romans legislated on it. And when new civilizations rose, they borrowed both its form and its spirit. The idea that human thought deserved a physical home. As night settles over Pergamon's hills and Alexandria's harbor, you realize you've witnessed an invisible thread connecting generations. From Nile reeds to parchment scrolls, from scrolls to bound books, every civilization inherits a little paperwork and a little pride in organizing it. The torchlight flickers on a Roman desk as a scribe writes one last note before bed. His handwriting is slow, tired, but steady. The words read, filed, signed, stored. He blows out the lamp, and somewhere the papyrus curls gently in the darkness, still holding his mark. You wake to the rustle of parchment and the faint scratch of a pen, a familiar sound by now, the heartbeat of civilization itself. Only this time, the scratching feels heavier, more deliberate. You're no longer in a sunlit workshop or a temple archive. You're in the echoing corridors of power, where ink shapes empires and papyrus carries as much weight as a sword. A scribe sits at his desk beneath a high stone archway, his reed pen poised like a dagger. The papyrus before him is crisp, pale, waiting. Around him, officials pace, whispering nervously. A decree must be drafted, something about land rights, or maybe grain rations, or perhaps the construction of a new temple that just happens to honor the pharaoh's latest political whim. The scribe begins to write, and you can almost hear the hush fall over the room. Each stroke of his pen feels monumental, even though he's only recording words dictated by someone else. You realize that in Egypt, power doesn't just reside in the crown, it resides in the hand that writes. The pharaoh, of course, is divine. His words are law. But even divinity needs documentation. Each command he utters must be transcribed, copied, and distributed along the Nile like the current itself. Scribes, those quiet bureaucratic magicians, transform spoken authority into physical permanence. Without them, decrees would vanish like breath in the desert air. One official leans over the scribe's desk, muttering, "Make sure it says I ordered, not we ordered." The scribe nods, his expression neutral. He knows how to survive this job, obey the ink, not the ego. It's a lesson every Egyptian bureaucrat learns early. Records are eternal, and errors are dangerous. Once written, the papyrus outlives the speaker, and sometimes it condemns him. You picture a nervous clerk caught between truth and career, quietly revising a date or a name to protect his superior. Ancient politics meets office editing. Historians still argue whether scribes ever intentionally revised history under royal orders. Some point to curious gaps in royal lists or duplicate reigns that suggest strategic rewriting. Was one pharaoh's name chiseled out because he fell from favor? Or was another quietly elevated from local governor to godlike monarch through a few careful brushstrokes? You can almost hear the ancient defense. It wasn't falsification, it was administrative clarity. In the grand halls of Thebes, massive scrolls document royal gifts to temples, gold, land, cattle. Some of those gifts, however, look suspiciously inflated. 10 bulls donated, reads one line, though perhaps only 2 ever mooed their way to the priests. You smirk quietly. Ancient embezzlement, recorded beautifully in hieratic script. In the more secret corners of government, scribes copy messages meant only for royal eyes, reports from spies, letters from generals, complaints from foreign emissaries. Bureaucracy, it seems, has always had its shadow side. A courier enters, bowing low. "A message from the northern border," he announces. The scribe accepts the scroll, breaks the seal, and reads silently. His expression tightens. He takes a fresh sheet and begins drafting a response before the pharaoh's advisor even speaks. The system runs itself. You drift closer, noticing the detail in his ink strokes, dark at first, then lighter as the reed dries. The writing flows in columns, straight and narrow, the visual embodiment of discipline. Bureaucracy as an art form. Outside the chamber, clerks bustle with stacks of scrolls under their arms. They look like ancient interns, tired, slightly bewildered, and terrified of dropping anything. One mutters, "If I misplace the royal grain inventory again, I'll be reassigned to counting crocodiles." His friend snorts, "You'd still need papyrus for that." But not all paperwork served the throne. In more quiet offices, minor officials record petitions from farmers, laborers, and widows. A man complains that his neighbor diverted water from the irrigation canal. A woman demands payment for woven linen supplied to the temple. These voices, too, find their place on papyrus. Proof that even in a theocracy, documentation could give ordinary people a kind of power. In one surviving fragment, an ancient Egyptian worker complains about not receiving his grain rations. "We are hungry. We have no oil. We have no clothing." Right to the pharaoh. It's one of the earliest written labor protests in history. Bureaucracy, you realize, cuts both ways. It can suppress, but it can also preserve dissent. Night falls, and you find yourself in another archive, this one quiet and cold. A priest unrolls an old decree, his lips moving silently as he reads. The ink has faded, but the words still bind. The pharaoh who issued it has turned to dust, yet his will remains enforceable. You can't help but feel a shiver. Power, frozen in papyrus. There's another layer to this too. The manipulation of legacy. Some pharaohs ordered their names carved deep into stone, but others preferred a softer immortality, the written record. Scrolls copied in temples and distributed across the land could outlive statues. Others went further, erasing predecessors entirely. The most famous example, of course, is the mysterious Akhenaten, the heretic pharaoh who worshipped the sun disk Aten. After his death, scribes were ordered to strike his name from every record, his papyri destroyed, his temples dismantled. Bureaucracy used not for preservation, but for deletion. It's strangely modern, the idea that history itself can be edited, censored, or rebranded. Somewhere a scribe sits with his pen, hesitating. To write or not to write? To preserve or to erase? It's a small decision with cosmic consequences. By torchlight, a younger apprentice watches, trying to understand this quiet dance of power. "Master," he asks softly, "if writing makes a thing true, what happens when we stop writing it?" The old scribe smiles faintly. "Then it never existed." The torch flickers, throwing long shadows over the shelves. Scrolls line the walls like sleeping snakes, each one coiled around a secret. Somewhere among them lies the truth, wrapped in 1,000 layers of ink and politics. And yet you can't help but admire it all. The audacity of a civilization that believed it could control not only its people, but its own memory. As you step back into the night, the stars seem to shimmer like lines of script across the sky. The wind off the desert hums softly, like the turning of a scroll. Power fades. Kingdoms fall. But the paperwork, that's eternal.
The next time you open your eyes, you're sitting cross-legged on the cool floor of a small, dimly lit room. The air smells of reed pulp, beeswax, and the faint tang of ink.
Around you are bundles of scrolls stacked in careful disorder, half finished, half forgotten, and fully indispensable. A figure leans over a low wooden table, his posture curved like a question mark. He's a scribe, one of the quiet engines of ancient civilization. His fingers are stained black, his eyes tired, his mouth moving slightly as he mutters the words he's writing. Every mark he makes will outlive him by centuries, and yet, at this moment, he looks profoundly unimpressed by eternity. A small oil lamp flickers beside him, illuminating his tools. A reed pen, a small cup of soot ink, a palette carved with care. Nothing about his craft looks grand, yet everything about it holds civilization together. He pauses, flexing his hand. Then he glances at a small clay tablet by his side, today's assignment list. It reads something like, record temple donation, copy grain tally, write letter to chief builder, urgent, update death register, again. It's comforting in a strange way. Bureaucracy, it seems, has always been about lists. You watch him dip his pen and begin anew, the strokes elegant yet efficient. His handwriting is fluid, the product of endless repetition. Hieratic script, the cursive form of hieroglyphs, flows across the papyrus like a thin black river. Each curve and flick of his pen tells a story not just of language, but of the body itself. Disciplined, practiced, quietly weary. "Don't smudge the gods," a voice murmurs behind him. It's another scribe, older, leaning against the wall with the air of someone who has given the same advice 1,000 times. The younger man grunts. "The gods are fine. It's the overseer I'm worried about." The elder chuckles softly. "Ah, yes, the true pantheon of Egypt. Supervisors, accountants, and inspectors." They share a look of weary solidarity. In their world, divine favor might come from prayer, but job security comes from neat handwriting. You learn that scribes were among the most educated and respected people in Egypt, but also, paradoxically, among the most overworked. They could read, write, and calculate when most others couldn't. That made them indispensable. But that also meant they were constantly in demand, recording harvests, contracts, medical recipes, hymns, and curses, always writing, never resting. In a society built on order, scribes were both the architects and the servants of that order. "Sometimes," the younger one says, stretching his cramped fingers, "I wonder if anyone actually reads half of what we write." "Oh, they read it," the elder replies, eyes twinkling. "They just don't understand it." Outside, a servant brings water and dates, setting them down quietly. The scribes barely look up. You get the sense that meals are more interruption than pleasure here. The rhythm of the pen is what sustains them. There's something deeply human about this little scene. It could be any office in any era, the low chatter, the quiet fatigue, the shared cynicism. The only difference is the dress code and the furniture. As the evening deepens, the younger scribe opens a new scroll, this one not for work, but for himself. He hesitates, glances toward the door, and begins to write in small, private script. You lean closer and realize he's keeping a diary. He writes of boredom, of pride, of the ache in his fingers. He complains about his superior's obsession with perfect alignment. He wonders if the gods care more about devotion or documentation. He writes about his son, still too young to hold a pen, and how he dreams the boy will one day inherit his craft, but maybe also his peace. The entry ends with a single line. We write to remember, but perhaps
We also write to forget. He rolls the papyrus carefully, ties it with a thin strip of linen, and hides it behind a stack of temple accounts. You realize that somewhere in an undiscovered tomb, that little confession might still exist, waiting quietly like a heartbeat buried under sand. The next morning, the scribes gather in the courtyard, squinting at the light. Their reed pens are tucked behind their ears, their hands calloused but steady. One recites a few lines from a famous text, something every student learns by heart. The scribe's words last longer than his tomb. His scroll is his child, his name, his immortality. It's both inspiring and slightly tragic. Immortality, yes, but one that comes with wrist cramps. You notice too how apprentices hover nearby, copying every gesture. They're young, nervous, and eager. Their first lessons aren't about language, but about posture, how to sit properly, how to hold the pen, and how to keep ink from blotting in the desert heat. Writing, after all, is as physical as it is intellectual. One drops his ink pot, splattering black across the sand. The courtyard freezes. His teacher sighs deeply. A good scribe, he says, never blames the papyrus. There's laughter, then life resumes. You watch the scene fade like drying ink. The sound of writing fades into a kind of music, a rhythm that has carried through millennia. The scribes may have lived quietly, their names forgotten, but their words became the bones of history. When the last light flickers out, the papyrus still glows faintly in your memory, rows of ink lines stretching into the dark, like tiny black footprints leading toward eternity.
When you open your eyes again, the desert has melted away. The flickering oil lamps have become fluorescent tubes, the smell of ink replaced by printer toner, and somewhere, a coffee machine hums like an ancient spell that no one remembers casting. You blink and realize you're in an office, not a pharaoh's archive, but your own little kingdom of post-it notes and paperwork. There's a faint hum of air conditioning, the shuffle of papers, and that same unmistakable sigh that's been echoing since 2500 BCE. Another day, another form to fill out. You glance at your desk, a glowing screen where the papyrus once lay, your keyboard clattering like a chorus of reed pens, and suddenly, everything about the modern world feels suspiciously Egyptian. The calendar pinned to your wall, it's still built around the rhythms of the Nile, only now disguised as quarterly goals. The spreadsheet on your monitor, a digital descendant of those grain tallies scrawled on papyrus rolls. Even the word paperwork whispers the echo of papyrus, that ancient plant which once soaked in river water, flattened by hand, and dried under the same sun that now bakes your morning commute. Historians still argue whether the Egyptians invented bureaucracy out of brilliance or necessity. Maybe both. After all, when your entire civilization depends on the flooding of a river, you need to keep track of everything. The harvests, the taxes, the workers, the rituals, and, naturally, someone had to sign the forms. That someone, of course, became everyone, a long, unbroken lineage of scribes, clerks, and office workers, stretching across millennia. The tools changed, but the rhythm stayed the same. Record, stamp, file, repeat. You imagine one of those old temple scribes standing here with you now, staring at your computer. He'd probably call it sorcery. You'd call it Monday. And between the two of you, the only real difference would be caffeine versus dates. A small part of you smiles at the thought that every email you send, every form you submit, is part of a 5,000-year-old conversation about how humans try to remember, organize, and control their chaotic little worlds. The Egyptians didn't just invent papyrus, they invented permanence. The idea that words could last longer than voices, that ideas could survive their creators, that ink could make time behave. You can almost hear the shuffle of scrolls turning into the rustle of modern paperwork. The papyrus led to parchment, parchment to paper, paper to the pixel. The physical scroll became the digital cloud. And somewhere, a modern pharaoh in a glass tower still demands 3 copies, signed and stamped. It's comforting, in a sleepy sort of way. The chaos of your inbox, the endless forms and reports, they're not a curse of modern life, but a legacy. You're participating in the same ritual as those ancient scribes, transforming thought into symbol and symbol into permanence. You can almost hear the shuffle of scrolls turning into the rustle of modern paperwork. The papyrus led to parchment, parchment to paper, paper to the pixel. The physical scroll became the digital cloud. And somewhere, a modern pharaoh in a glass tower still demands 3 copies, signed and stamped. It's comforting, in a sleepy sort of way. The chaos of your inbox, the endless forms and reports, they're not a curse of modern life, but a legacy. You're participating in the same ritual as those ancient scribes, transforming thought into symbol and symbol into permanence. You can almost hear the shuffle of scrolls turning into the rustle of modern paperwork. The papyrus led to parchment, parchment to paper, paper to the pixel. The physical scroll became the digital cloud. And somewhere, a modern pharaoh in a glass tower still demands 3 copies, signed and stamped. It's comforting, in a sleepy sort of way. The chaos of your inbox, the endless forms and reports, they're not a curse of modern life, but a legacy. You're participating in the same ritual as those ancient scribes, transforming thought into symbol and symbol into permanence. You can almost hear the shuffle of scrolls turning into the rustle of modern paperwork. The papyrus led to parchment, parchment to paper, paper to the pixel. The physical scroll became the digital cloud. And somewhere, a modern pharaoh in a glass tower still demands 3 copies, signed and stamped. It's comforting, in a sleepy sort of way. The chaos of your inbox, the endless forms and reports, they're not a curse of modern life, but a legacy. You're participating in the same ritual as those ancient scribes, transforming thought into symbol and symbol into permanence. You can almost hear the shuffle of scrolls turning into the rustle of modern paperwork. The papyrus led to parchment, parchment to paper, paper to the pixel. The physical scroll became the digital cloud. And somewhere, a modern pharaoh in a glass tower still demands 3 copies, signed and stamped. It's comforting, in a sleepy sort of way. The chaos of your inbox, the endless forms and reports, they're not a curse of modern life, but a legacy. You're participating in the same ritual as those ancient scribes, transforming thought into symbol and symbol into permanence. You can almost hear the shuffle of scrolls turning into the rustle of modern paperwork. The papyrus led to parchment, parchment to paper, paper to the pixel. The physical scroll became the digital cloud. And somewhere, a modern pharaoh in a glass tower still demands 3 copies, signed and stamped. It's comforting, in a sleepy sort of way. The chaos of your inbox, the endless forms and reports, they're not a curse of modern life, but a legacy. You're participating in the same ritual as those ancient scribes, transforming thought into symbol and symbol into permanence. You can almost hear the shuffle of scrolls turning into the rustle of modern paperwork. The papyrus led to parchment, parchment to paper, paper to the pixel. The physical scroll became the digital cloud. And somewhere, a modern pharaoh in a glass tower still demands 3 copies, signed and stamped. It's comforting, in a sleepy sort of way. The chaos of your inbox, the endless forms and reports, they're not a curse of modern life, but a legacy. You're participating in the same ritual as those ancient scribes, transforming thought into symbol and symbol into permanence. You can almost hear the shuffle of scrolls turning into the rustle of modern paperwork. The papyrus led to parchment, parchment to paper, paper to the pixel. The physical scroll became the digital cloud. And somewhere, a modern pharaoh in a glass tower still demands 3 copies, signed and stamped. It's comforting, in a sleepy sort of way. The chaos of your inbox, the endless forms and reports, they're not a curse of modern life, but a legacy. You're participating in the same ritual as those ancient scribes, transforming thought into symbol and symbol into permanence. You can almost hear the shuffle of scrolls turning into the rustle of modern paperwork. The papyrus led to parchment, parchment to paper, paper to the pixel. The physical scroll became the digital cloud. And somewhere, a modern pharaoh in a glass tower still demands 3 copies, signed and stamped. It's comforting, in a sleepy sort of way. The chaos of your inbox, the endless forms and reports, they're not a curse of modern life, but a legacy. You're participating in the same ritual as those ancient scribes, transforming thought into symbol and symbol into permanence. You can almost hear the shuffle of scrolls turning into the rustle of modern paperwork. The papyrus led to parchment, parchment to paper, paper to the pixel. The physical scroll became the digital cloud. And somewhere, a modern pharaoh in a glass tower still demands 3 copies, signed and stamped. It's comforting, in a sleepy sort of way. The chaos of your inbox, the endless forms and reports, they're not a curse of modern life, but a legacy. You're participating in the same ritual as those ancient scribes, transforming thought into symbol and symbol into permanence. You can almost hear the shuffle of scrolls turning into the rustle of modern paperwork. The papyrus led to parchment, parchment to paper, paper to the pixel. The physical scroll became the digital cloud. And somewhere, a modern pharaoh in a glass tower still demands 3 copies, signed and stamped. It's comforting, in a sleepy sort of way. The chaos of your inbox, the endless forms and reports, they're not a curse of modern life, but a legacy. You're participating in the same ritual as those ancient scribes.